Okay, there we
Okay. Seems like you
go.
enable it.
So yeah, you were saying how you have a situation where maintainers can still change branch protections, and you want to find a way to prevent that.
Yes.
So with the new proposal of our customizable roles, the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that you would be able to create a custom role. We see here across the top: guest, reporter, developer, maintainer, and owner as the five default that we have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, our current implementation will only be additive permissions. So an example being that I can't subtract or remove that permission from the ability for that maintainer. So
Yeah.
in this case, you would need to create a custom developer role with the
Mm-hmm.
maintainer permissions that you want that do not have that permission. Now, in the future, the way this is supposed to work, or the way that we want this to work for the rest of the groups, is that you will be able to then customize or create changes within this permission table. So one of the things that we're doing is we are unifying or merging permissions as sort of the MVC.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one we merged was to uh, view branch details or view pipeline details
Mm-hmm.
and edit pipeline details. So in this example of merging these permissions, your team would be able to do something similar in regards to perhaps making changes to this particular permission.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that you'll need to test first, obviously, but you'd want to go through the standard process of just like, how is this going to work in the larger environment? And that's sort of what I'm trying to work on, a process to allow all the other groups and stages to go and create and customize a permissions table to make them more I don't want to say individualized, but more appropriate for their feature. So in this case, for your feature, you want to prevent that particular permission, but we don't have that ability to remove that permission. So the first MVC of that proposal would be to create the developer role and then add the permissions from maintainer that you want, minus that one branch protection permission, so that then they won't have the ability to enable
Mm-hmm.
or disable permissions.
Yeah.
That might be quite a bit down the road in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the proposal you had made with the checkboxes, if you want to show that, if that would be the faster proposal.
Mm-hmm.
But at least for the custom permissions that we're trying to do, at some point in time, we'd hope that you would be able to make whatever change the permission that you would need in order
Mm-hmm.
to allow for any sort of features like this, right?
Yeah, so I was thinking if that's possible in the future. So now what we can do is like we can just do this, like for example, create a new policy and says override settings. So for example, um like this is like the one I showed you before,
Mm-hmm.
like with this checkbox is like in each policy you enable it. So I can also create a new policy uh, which says like for override these settings is enable what project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the future it could be easier. It's not says project, could says role. It's like if they create a new role, it's like I don't know, role uh security only. So
Yeah,
then like another like maintainer cannot do this anymore.
right.
So then like this policy is not like project specific
Mm-hmm.
policy override for select role, then this policy will like set like basically this permission table here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in the setting, but it's in a policy.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, both ways would work. But
Mhm.
once we have more once the customization of the permissions and roles is more mature, then we can definitely get to that better permission you showed of just like security role and can do that, and then you'll have that customized permission or that customized role for that.
Yeah. So our like you think maybe is easy like you said down in the row. So maybe the first is like uh remove this position, like remove this permission for certain roles.
Mm-hmm.
Should also be it's like no developer like allowed to do this. I will do that later, but it's like for this role, no developer can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe like faster compared to giving right to create a new role. Like in a policy, we can prevent this. Do you think that's faster?
I think in the meantime, yes, like I said, because the customization of this might take a while.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like I said, we're just doing that first MVC right now to see how that
Mm-hmm.
works. Um, but at some future point, yes. I just don't know
Mm-hmm.
how long. So arguably the plan is that once we have like a process to create and manage and edit custom roles, um, then you as a designer can say, okay, I have a
Mm-hmm.
requirement for my feature where I need to make a change to a particular permission behavior to allow for this sort of condition.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can now create an issue or a task for the rest of the team to go back and engineer that change in the permissions
Yeah.
to allow for this, or to create that customization ability to where then the user can create or create their own customized permission for that.
Yeah. I think this probably like really in the future that like the policy maybe is generalized. It's not like a security policy, but it's a policy for roles. Like if you
Right.
create the new role, what the things need to do. It could be like if we have a pattern now, in the future we can like have a just reuse this security permission and things for all the roles. Like this
Mm-hmm.
role, this permission, etc. Okay, I will explore more this option. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's more like a future oriented thing if we create a new policy, right?
Yeah. But like I said, the idea is that once we have our first iteration and the foundation laid down for this process, then you can take ownership and push the change you need for your permission and your feature
Mhm.
faster, right? Without having to rely on somebody else to prioritize it. So the big thing about the customizable permissions is that we want every group and stage to kind of take ownership of their permissions and how they interact with their feature.
Yeah.
So that if they have a requirement like this that needs to change or needs to have some more
Mhm.
granularity or flexibility for users, then you can make that adjustment as needed
Yeah. Okay, cool.
and then give that feature to users to make their own customizations, right?
Yeah, because I want this like at least for first idea, if we don't customize roles, we customize like this override setting, like by project, by policy, then
Mm-hmm.
it on two levels. This is on group level,
Mm-hmm.
this is on project level. So for the roles, like you also plan on group and project level, or only group level people can manage, and all the project need to follow what's it defined by the group. For
Well, and
those,
you can define that as you want, right? So if
um,
you define your organization with that permission structure, then
mhm,
it should be no problem, right? But it's up to the user to define that structure.
yeah, okay, cool.
But I mean, for you from the GitLab side, for example,
Mhm,
you want to understand what is the hierarchy that would impact or that a user would expect that impact to occur, right? So should it be only at the top level for all groups and all
mhm,
projects, or is it individualized, right? Is there a customized opportunity for every group and project to have their own sort of behavior interaction, right? So there's I don't know how it works right now. I haven't used this particular feature,
mhm,
but I do see value for both for like a more security minded organization where at the top level it's managed in one spot, or like if it's a small team with like 3 or 4 developers, like I want to be able to have flexibility everywhere, then make it customizable across the all of your groups and subgroups.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. And when do you think like we can maybe potentially do those type of things?
So right now, like I said, we are in the I guess validation or QA stage, because the MVC already exists in the platform. It's behind the feature flag, if I recall correctly. And so we're getting data on how people interact with it and what sort of problems it causes in the platform, if any. So I think after that, there'll be like a showcase or like a discussion to show, here's the results, here's what happened. And I'll work with the engineers to get that information and kind of talk more about it once we get it. But I don't expect it to be far off. The next step for us right now is creating the front end, because right now that new MVC only exists in the API.
Yeah.
But right now, from the front end perspective, the designs are more or less done. I'm doing like a few rounds of validation with some enterprise organizations to see how they feel about it in terms of the interactions. Do the interactions make sense? But I don't expect anything to change dramatically. But from there, that's when presumably every group and stage can start making their own changes or adding to, changes to the permissions to allow that more flexibility. And that's sort of what I was doing. I don't know if you saw that other epic where I broke out every sort of subcategory of the permissions to try and have this discussion more or less to start the thought process. Okay, me as in your case, Camellia, how do I start looking at the permissions to see what I need to change to make things more logical, more flexible for my users so that they can then have access to this customizable role and make their own particular custom role, like the security example you showed, and then start prioritizing that work in your milestone planning.
Could you share like that like front end, the UI like with me? I can maybe reuse something.
Yeah, for sure. Let me send you the Figma link. Let's see. Okay, I just sent you an invite to the Figma file so you can take a look at it and see how we're planning with it. Like I said, right now I'm doing a validation round with some end users, but I don't expect much to change dramatically.
Cool. Oh, can I see this? Oh, yeah. And another thing, like when we enable this, and this table on the dock won't be there anymore because like each group can change it, and that dock is like basically not giving the right information.
Yes, that's correct, because then you'd have your custom permission and then you can define that permission at the top level, and that would then hide or remove that feature from people who don't have access to it.
Okay, cool. I will have a look to see that how can I do that? Because when we create a new role, and this new role, that thing is like the role and the policy need to be connected. So when there is a security policy enabled, and then probably we want those roles to be enabled as well.
Yeah, and that's part of the customization of the role that you're creating, right? So you create that custom new role with that particular permission that allows that policy, and then you'll define those permissions in the policy once you say, in that particular example you showed with like a Dropbox saying this user role can do this or whatever, right?
Yeah. Okay, I will think about it. To see what's the most stream way of doing that.
Sure.
And also probably we need to show it somewhere, the interaction between like this role permission, the admin area, and the policy. Because like I assume that in the role and permission, you will show that which role can do what. And if I have a policy to override those things or change it, we also need to like show it somewhere.
Right. And also, like I said, right now, because the MVC is only in the API and the front end, the prototype that you see is a huge long list of permissions. That's not
Yeah,
going to happen in the next 1 or 2, 3 milestones, right? Because we only
yeah.
have the one.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of opportunity to change or improve the front end on the UI once we start
Mhm.
getting more and more permissions into this customizable screen.
Yeah.
But I think for now, it's from my rounds of validation with stakeholders, it seems to make sense and it seems to work. But that's where that other related issue that I brought up
Mhm.
about overlapping permissions or
Yeah.
connecting permission groupings, making sure
Mhm.
that permissions connect logically. That's again back to each individual group or stage to make sure that those connections are logical or perhaps can be improved or reduced in complexity. So giving the y'all or every team, every group to start improving the permissions and settings, or excuse me, the permissions and roles based
Mhm.
off of what makes more sense. In the past, it was kind of like we don't have the ability to make these changes, but now we do.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So like this UI, maybe like a safely to say end of this year, we'll probably have it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how fast the rest of the team can prioritize this work, right? So if if it goes out and everything's working fine, and now we have like a road, excuse me, a roadmap. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if all the rest of the groups and stages can reprioritize work and say, okay, now that we have this ability to do this granular permissions, these changing of permissions, um, let's start rethinking about our UX roadmaps, our long-term planning. How can we start shuffling some priorities to give more customization or more flexibility
Yeah.
to the features and for our users, right?
Yeah. Cool. I think that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for this information. It's very
Cool.
good.
Yeah, I'm glad to help.
Yeah.
And like I said, you have the link to the prototype. Please feel free to contribute and suggest any improvements or any sort of confusion that you might see.
Mhm.
Just leave some comments.
Yeah, we'll do that. And
Okay,
like I will put some new ideas in my prototype and then I will share it.
cool. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, see you.
See you.